Welcome to the Leadership Buzz with Lloyd Buzz Buzzell, an International Coaching Federation credentialed coach, DISC practitioner, and retired Air Force officer with 37 years of leadership experience. This podcast is for leaders who want to align behavior with values and grow in self-awareness. And each episode features one book, one idea, one story, and 3 coaching questions to help you reflect on your leadership. Work hard. Tell the truth. Here's Buzz. Let's roll.
Welcome back to the Leadership Buzz. Before we jump into this week's book, I want to thank everyone who has listened, shared the podcast, or reached out with feedback. As we continue to grow, I'd love to hear from you. What leadership challenges are you facing? What books, stories, or ideas would help you? The goal of this podcast is simple: one book, one idea, one story, and then 3 coaching questions to help us become better leaders and reflect. This week starts with a photograph. On Christmas Eve 1968, Apollo 8 astronaut Bill Anders captured one of the most famous images in history, Earthrise. For the first time, humanity looked back at our planet from the moon and saw something different. The picture did not change Earth, it changed our perspective. Years later, Anders would bring that same ability to see differently into another mission, leading General Dynamics. At a time when many measured success by getting bigger, Anders asked a different question: what actually creates value? Sometimes leadership begins by changing what we see. TJ, tell us about this week's book, The Outsiders.
Today's book is The Outsiders: 8 Unconventional CEOs and Their Radically Rational Blueprint for Success by William Thorndike. Buzz takes us into the story of Bill Anders, Apollo 8 astronaut and later CEO of General Dynamics. Anders stepped into a struggling company and challenged the traditional definition of leadership success. Instead of chasing size, attention, or growth for growth's sake, he focused on discipline, clarity, and creating lasting value. It is a story about courage, stewardship, and making the right decisions, even when they are unpopular. Great leaders are not measured by how much they build. They are measured by the courage and discipline to do what the mission requires. Here's Buzz with today's Leadership Buzz.
When most people hear the name Bill Anders or read about Bill Anders, they probably don't immediately think or see about business leadership. They think about space. They think about Apollo 8 and Christmas Eve, 1968. 3 astronauts became the first humans to leave Earth's orbit and travel to the moon. And during the mission, Bill Anders captured one of the most famous images in human history. It was called Earthrise. It was one of the first color photographs of Earth taken by humans from deep space. And what made that photograph so powerful was not just what people saw, it was how differently they saw it. For the first time, humanity looked back at our home from a completely different perspective. No borders, no division, just this small blue planet surrounded by darkness. The Earth itself did not change. The perspective changed. And I think that is the first leadership lesson for Bill Anders. Sometimes growth does not begin because the situation changes. Sometimes growth begins because the way we see the situation change. Because perspective changes decision. And years later, Bill Anderson would take that same ability to see differently into a completely different mission. And it wasn't at Apollo, it wasn't a spacecraft, it was a company called General Dynamics. When Anders became the chief executive officer, the defense industry was changed dramatically. The Cold War was ending, defense spending was shifting, and General Dynamics was facing a different future than the one it had been built for. The traditional CEO mindset often says, grow bigger, add more, and expand. Measure success by size, more revenue, people, and programs. But Anders looked at the situation differently. He asked a more important question: what actually creates value? Not what looks impressive, not what feeds my ego as a leader, not what everyone expects a company to do, but what does this organization need right now? That's a very different type of question, because sometimes leadership is not about adding more, it's about having the courage to focus to simplify and let go. And I think this is where Anders teaches us something really important. Leadership is stewardship. We do not own these roles forever. Whether we lead a company, a team, a family, or an organization, we are entrusted with something for a season. The question is not, how do I prove I was here? The better question is, how do I leave this better after I found it?
Buzz, that sounds simple, but it seems like many leaders struggle with that. Why is it so difficult for leaders to redefine success when they step into a new role?
TJ, I think it's because success creates an identity. The things that made us successful become part of who we think we are. And that is difficult because the very things that got us promoted may not be the things needed in the next role. I learned this lesson many times in my Air Force career. One moment that really stands out was moving from being an individual contributor into a flight commander role. I had been a flight commander several times, but one particular assignment really shaped me. I took over a flight of nearly 100 airmen, and I learned very quickly that the way I defined success had to change. Before that, success was often about me. Did I know my job? Was I prepared? Working hard? Could people count on me? Could I execute the mission? Those things mattered. My own individual contribution. They still matter. But suddenly the question changed. Now it was, are we prepared? Do we have what we need? Are we growing? And is the team supported? Does everyone understand the mission? And I'll be honest, I made a lot of mistakes. A lot. I very much cared deeply about people in the flight and what was going on. I put in a lot of hours and I worked as hard as I possibly could. I really wanted our people to succeed and I wanted the mission done right. But I had to learn that effort alone was not leadership. Just working hard itself by myself was not always the answer. And sometimes I even messed that up. Sometimes I had to stop carrying everything and start creating an environment where others could succeed. And thankfully, I had some great leaders who invested in me. They supported me and allowed me to make mistakes, but they also cared enough to pull me aside and tell me the truth when I needed to hear it. That's a gift. Listening is a gift. Use it. Because real development requires both support and challenge, encouragement and accountability. That experience changed how I viewed leadership. Because leadership was not about proving my value by how much I could personally accomplish, but leadership was about creating value through others and what we could accomplish. That's a perspective shift. The mission did not change, but my view of the mission had changed, just like the Earthrise photo. Same Earth, different view. I think every leader eventually faces that moment. That's the moment when the question arises. Early on, the question might be, how good can I become? But eventually, leadership takes on a different type of question. How good can we help others become? That is completely a different way of seeing the world and about seeing leadership. And that's what I appreciate about Mr. Anders. Astronaut, engineer, CEO. He was willing to look again, willing to challenge assumptions, and willing to ask whether yesterday's definition of success still fit tomorrow's challenge.
Coach Buzz, that idea of changing perspective connects a lot with coaching. How does a leader know when it might be time to change the way they are seeing a situation?
I think it starts with curiosity. Great leaders learn to question their own assumptions. One of the hardest things to recognize is that our experience can become both a strength and a limitation. Experience gives us wisdom. It gives us pattern recognition, which is very, very important, and it helps us make those decisions. But if we're not careful, we can start believing, hey, this worked for me before, so it must be the answer now. And leadership requires us to pause and ask, is that still true? What am I not seeing? What am I missing? What does this moment actually need for me? I see that even now in my transition into executive coaching, for 37 years, over a span of 40 years in uniform, people often look to me for answers, making decisions, solving the problem, providing direction. And in many situations, that was exactly what leadership required. But coaching has required a different perspective. Sometimes serving someone means not giving them my answer. Sometimes it means creating a space for them to discover their own. Same desire to serve, different perspective. And maybe that's a big lesson from Bill Anders. From space, he helped humanity see Earth differently. At General Dynamics, he helped an organization see success differently. And as our leaders, maybe one of our greatest responsibilities is helping ourselves and others see differently. Because the situation in front of us may not need more effort, it might not need more activity, it may simply just need a new perspective. The Earth didn't change, just the way we looked at it. A little more on Bill Anders. After being an astronaut, he would face a very different mission. That wasn't orbiting the moon, and it wasn't taking a photograph, but leading a company that needed a completely different perspective. In 1991, Anders became the chairman and CEO of General Dynamics, and the timing could not have been more challenging. The Cold War was ending, defense budgets were shrinking, and the world General Dynamics was built for was changing. The company had just experienced one of the worst financial periods in history, and the traditional thinking in the defense industry was still focused on getting better, bigger. More programs, more contracts, more growth. But Anders looked at it differently. Just like Earthrise changed the way we saw the planet, Anders changed the way General Dynamics saw success. He did something many CEOs would struggle to do. He made the company smaller. He sold businesses that were no longer aligned with the future strategy, including Cessna and the F-16 fighter aircraft division, which he personally flew. He reduced complexity and focused General Dynamics on the areas where it had a true competitive advantage. He asked a different question, not how much big can we become, but where can we create the most value? That's the powerful leadership shift. During this transformation, General Dynamics went from almost 100,000 employees to about 35,000. Annual revenue became smaller, but the company became stronger. Debt was reduced, shareholder value increased dramatically, and according to the outsiders, that's where Anders stood out. He was willing to challenge the traditional scoreboard because sometimes leaders confuse activity with impact. They confuse size with success, and they confuse holding on to the past with protecting the mission. Anders demonstrated stewardship. He understood that his responsibility was not to preserve everything he inherited. His responsibility was to position the organization for the future. The same astronaut who looked back at Earth and saw something no human had ever seen before brought that same mindset into leadership. Step back, change perspective, ask a better question. Sometimes transformation does not begin by doing more. Sometimes it begins by having the courage to see it differently. And maybe even the bigger lesson from Bill Anders is whether looking back at Earth from Apollo 8 or looking at General Dynamics, as a CEO, he created space to see differently. And I think that is where leadership and coaching meet. So often we try to solve the problem that is directly in front of us, move faster, work harder, find the answer. But sometimes the breakthrough comes from slowing down. What am I not seeing? What assumption am I carrying? What perspective have I not considered? The team may not have changed, or the challenge may not have changed, but a new perspective can change how we show up. I've seen this in leadership, and I am seeing it again through coaching. The answer is not always adding more. Sometimes growth comes from creating space to reflect, to listen, space to see something that was there all along. Bill Anders reminded us of something powerful. The Earth was always there, but seeing it from a different perspective changed everything. And sometimes the greatest things we can do as leaders is to help others discover their own Earthrise moment, a moment where they pause, step back, and see differently.
Coach Buzz, can you give us this week's 3 coaching questions for our listeners?
Questions for our listeners this week. What does success look like for you in this season of your leadership, and how has that definition changed over time? This is where Anders challenged bigger is always better. What are you holding on to today that you may no longer serve the mission or the people that you lead? Finally, if you viewed your leadership role as stewardship rather than ownership, what might you notice differently? This really connects to your legacy.
Thanks, Buzz. Today's lesson from The Outsiders and Bill Anders reminds us that leadership is not always about adding more, growing bigger, or chasing what the world defines as success. Sometimes the greatest leadership decision is having the courage to simplify, focus, and protect what matters most. Anders showed us that true leaders are stewards. They are trusted with people, organizations, and missions for a season, and the measure of success is whether they leave them stronger. This week, ask yourself, what am I holding on to that no longer serves the mission? Where do I need the courage to make the right decision, not just the popular one? Until next time, keep leading with purpose, and remember, work hard and tell the truth.
Thanks for listening to the Leadership Buzz. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe so you don't miss future conversations. And if you have a moment, leave a rating or review. That helps other leaders discover the show. If these kinds of leadership questions resonate with you and you'd like to explore them more deeply, feel free to reach out to me. Coaching conversations often start exactly this way. Until next time, work hard, tell the truth.